"Put that fish down," she screamed like we'd just sacrificed a goat on a dock. Her $900 0-cent sunglasses were crooked, her face blotchy with rage, and her tablet was flapping in the wind like a legal exorcism manual. All I'd done was help my daughter bait a hook. One bluegill, one peaceful morning, and here came Karen Wellington, HOA president, Banshee-in-chief, shrieking about unauthorized emotional use of community resources. That was the $500 0 cents moment. That was when I realized I wasn't going to argue. I was going to buy the entire lake and evict her from her own throne. If you told me 6 months ago that I'd end up in a war with a woman named Karen over a fishing rod, I'd have laughed, poured myself another glass of Cabernet, and gone back to not giving a damn. But that was before cancer took my wife, before my daughter stopped smiling, and before we packed up our lives and moved to Brook Lake Meadows, a gated community that looked like it was built by Pottery Barn and governed by Mussolini. On paper, it had everything: tree-lined streets, lake access, top schools, and what the realtor called a light HOA with minimal interference. What she failed to mention was that the president of that HOA treated bylaws like the Ten Commandments, except she wrote them herself and edited them weekly. Her name? Karen Wellington, naturally. The day it all started was the first real spring morning in April. Crisp air, sunlight bouncing off the water, and Nora, my 14-year-old, actually laughing for the first time since Rachel's funeral. We sat on the edge of the dock, legs dangling, the rod between us, watching bluegill break the surface like miniature miracles. For a moment, everything was still. No grief, no therapy bills, just the quiet magic of a dad trying to help his daughter rediscover her world. And then heels, not just any heels. Designer athleisure sneakers clicking against the dock like the sound of impending doom. I turned to see her: sunglasses, clipboard, surgically arched eyebrows, and the unmistakable haircut of a woman who'd sued a Starbucks for getting her name wrong. "Excuse me," she said with a tight-lipped smile that suggested she considered compassion a liability. "What exactly do you think you're—" I blinked. "The fishing," I said, holding up the rod like I was showing her an exotic fruit. Nora looked at me, suddenly unsure. Karen didn't miss a beat. "That's a $600 0-cent violation. Fishing is prohibited under the amended Brook Lake Environmental Preservation Regulations, Section 4, Subpoint B." I stared at her like she'd just cited scripture written in Klingon. "The realtor said lake access included fishing." "The amendment passed last month," she replied, tapping her tablet. "We notified residents via email. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, mister." She squinted at her screen. "Granger. Elliot Granger." "Ah, yes, the new resident from the Sycamore property." Her tone made it sound like I'd just admitted to squatting in someone's wine cellar. "Well, we didn't get any email," I muttered, still trying to wrap my head around the absurdity. "Did you check your spam folder?" she asked, sweet as cyanide. "It's not my fault if residents choose to remain uninformed." I wanted to argue, I wanted to scream, but then I looked at Nora. Her smile was gone, replaced by that hollow look I'd spent 6 months trying to erase. I turned back to Karen, jaw clenched. "We'll leave," I said quietly. "Just email me the fine." "Of course," she replied, victorious, like she'd just defended the realm from a rogue minnow. As she turned on her heel and disappeared back into her pastel war zone of manicured lawns and weaponized bylaws, I sat there wondering what the hell just happened. I thought I bought a home. Turns out I bought a front row seat to tyranny with lake views. And if Karen thought a $600 0-cents fine would scare me off, she clearly hadn't read the part of my resume that included venture capitalist with spite and time to burn. By the time we got home, I had a migraine the size of Texas and a 14-year-old daughter who looked like she'd just watched her puppy get taken by the IRS. I opened my laptop, fully prepared to pay the fine and move on, until I saw the HOA website. Now, I've read contracts for companies worth 9 figures, but this thing was a masterpiece of bureaucratic gaslighting. 72 pages of dense HOA regulations, including one section that literally outlawed wind chimes over 4 decibels. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. But then I stumbled across something Interesting. The lake, our beloved blue sky reflecting serenity giving lake, wasn't owned by the HOA. It was leased, specifically leased by a company called Pinecrest Ventures under a 30-year recreational use agreement that was due to expire in exactly 6 weeks. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Karen had built her empire on land she didn't even own. Still in disbelief, I decided to go for a walk, clear my head, maybe talk to someone who had survived more than one HOA president. 3 houses down, I saw an older gentleman sitting on his porch with a cup of something that smelled like bourbon and regret. His name was Martin Kane, and he had the kind of look that said, "I've read more court briefs than you've read cereal boxes." We got to talking, and when I mentioned Karen's little lake find, his entire face tightened like a bulldog sniffing a lawsuit. "Let me guess," he said. "She quoted subsection blah, blah, waved her magical tablet, and told you you're in violation of neighborhood decency." "Pretty much," I nodded. He sipped his drink. "Karen's not enforcing rules, son. She's rewriting them. Every HOA president before her treated this job like glorified lawn duty. Karen treats it like she's the unelected monarch of a very beige kingdom." I asked if she was always this intense. Martin chuckled. "Buddy, she once fined a 6-year-old girl for laughing too loudly by the lake during a yoga session. Said the giggle disrupted the meditative harmony of the community." I stared at him. "Please tell me that's a joke." Martin deadpanned. "I wish. The kid's mom had to formally apologize. In writing." He leaned in. "The kicker? Karen posted photos of her wine and cheese parties by the same lake where she bans kids for breathing too enthusiastically." I started to feel the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't about fishing. This wasn't about environmental concern. This was about control. The lake wasn't a body of water to Karen. It was leverage, and suddenly the puzzle pieces clicks, the rule changes, the aggressive fines, the private events. She was consolidating power. You think this is just about fishing? No. This is about power, control, and one woman's real estate empire in yoga pants. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up reading property records, old HOA newsletters, and everything I could find on Pinecrest Ventures. Turns out, the lease on the lake was renewable, but only at the discretion of the property owner, meaning Karen's grip on the lake was slipping, and fast. If Pinecrest didn't renew, the HOA lost all legal standing, and if someone else bought it, well, that person would control the fate of Karen's empire. My mind was already spinning. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. I wasn't just going to fight the fine. I was going to end the reign of Queen Karen of Brook Lake Meadows, one chess move at a time. Martin didn't just have opinions, he had receipts, literal folders filled with HOA newsletters, fine notices, scanned meeting minutes, and a spreadsheet that looked like it could get someone audited just by opening it. He called it the Karen Collection, and let me tell you, it was horrifyingly organized. "She's weaponized bureaucracy," Martin said as he slid another file across his kitchen table. "Most people pay the fines because they don't want the hassle, but the pattern is clear. She fines, pressures, and buys." "Buys what?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew. "Homes," he said flatly. "The ones that get hit hardest with violations tend to sell within 6 months. And guess who ends up buying them? Some shell company linked to her real estate firm. Renovate, flip, profit. It's like HGTV meets House of Cards." I leaned back, the puzzle snapping tighter. Karen wasn't just a control freak with a clipboard. She was running a full-blown acquisition racket with legal stationery. Naturally, I needed a second opinion, and preferably from someone who could read bank filings like they were tabloid gossip. That's where Frankie Morales came in. Retired banker, lives 2 streets over, Hawaiian shirt even in winter, and the only man I know who keeps SEC filings on a flash drive in his sock drawer. Martin called him, and the next day we met in his cluttered garage/office, surrounded by dusty model trains and an espresso machine that cost more than my first car. "So you want to know how deep the rabbit hole goes?" Frankie asked, grinning as he booted up an ancient desktop computer that groaned like it remembered the mortgage crisis personally. "Karen's empire isn't just shady. It's over-leveraged, underreported, and one bad month away from crumbling like a gluten-free cookie." He showed me a web of LLCs, Wellington Holdings, Brookside Development, Vista Meadow Estates, LLC, all of them tied to one address, one P.O. box, one name behind the curtain. She's been laundering HOA influence into real estate acquisitions for years. This isn't neighborhood management, it's hostile takeover in yoga pants. It got worse. Frankie had cross-referenced property sale data with violation records. Turns out homes that received Karen's wrath were 3 times more likely to sell below market value, and nearly 80% of those were snapped up by entities linked to her or her allies. This wasn't an HOA. It was a corporate squeeze play dressed up like a bake sale. The kicker? She'd even billed the HOA for community improvement research trips, which, judging by the Instagram posts, were actually wine tours in Sonoma. "This is unreal," I muttered, scrolling through her business filings. "She's hiding behind bylaws like they're bulletproof glass." Frankie nodded. "Thing is, Elliot, if she gets control of that lake, it's over. Property values skyrocket for the land she owns, and she turns the rest of the neighborhood into leverage. This isn't personal to her, it's profit." I kept digging that night, eyes blurry from PDFs and barely legal fine print, and then I saw it. One of the shell companies listed in Frankie's spreadsheet had a pending application to purchase a recreational water feature from Pinecrest Ventures. The purchase offer was signed by none other than Wellington Capital Group. Stared at the screen, heart thudding. That was it, the lake. She wasn't leasing it, she was trying to own it. And the moment she did, fishing fines would be the least of our problems. HOA bylaws are one thing, property deeds are another. I sat back, a slow grin forming. "Guess who owns Wellington Capital?" I whispered. And just like that, the chessboard changed. You know a neighborhood's gone sideways when organizing a secret rebellion feels more natural than joining the HOA book club. Within 48 hours of uncovering Karen's plot to buy the lake, I'd gone full covert ops. First meeting, back corner of a bakery run by a woman named Patty who had 6 cats and 0 patience for tyrants. We called ourselves the Lakeside League, not because we were heroic, but because passive-aggressive dads and angry retirees didn't fit on the group chat icon. We met in bakeries, garages, the locker room at Planet Fitness, and once in a literal abandoned garden shed behind a realtor's office. You'd be amazed how many people in suburbia are just waiting for someone to say, "You're not crazy, Karen really is a dictator in Lululemon." These stories came pouring in like bad wine at a HOA mixer. There was Angela and Mike, the sweetest couple you'd ever meet, who got slapped with a formal violation for owning a dog breed deemed too exuberant for community standards. Their golden retriever, Marley, had apparently committed the heinous crime of being joyful. Another guy, Rick, was fined because his Halloween decorations included a skeleton that projected negative spiritual energy. A teenager named Zoe, banned from putting up a lemonade stand because it constituted unlicensed commercial activity. It was HOA hellscape, and Karen was the warden. We weren't dealing with a normal power trip. This was HOA gone full Orwell. Mini Hook, you think only governments use surveillance? Nah. HOA Karen had a camera pointed at every bush, mailbox, and mildly rebellious long gnome in Brook Lake Meadows. Of course, once Karen caught wind that the peasants were organizing, she did what all self-respecting neighborhood tyrants do. She retaliated like a caffeinated raccoon with a law degree. My house became ground zero. First came the notice about grass height discrepancy. My lawn was allegedly 1.2 centimeters too tall. Well, I didn't even know they made rulers that precise. Then it was the mailbox. Apparently, my house number was printed in Arial instead of Times New Roman, clearly a threat to the aesthetic soul of the cul-de-sac. And then my favorite, Nora's bike, left on the driveway for 7 minutes, was cited as improper outdoor storage and oriented against prevailing wind direction. That's right, the HOA had a stance on wind. I half expected the next citation to be for eye contact exceeding neighborhood comfort level. But the violations weren't just about me. They were about sending a message. Other resistance members started getting hit too. Angela received a letter about unapproved dog energy, which I still don't think is a real legal term. Rick was fined for having unseasonal front yard decor because his garden gnome was wearing a scarf in April. The goal was clear: isolate, intimidate, and crush dissent. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking apart, the resistance grew. Every ridiculous fine added fuel to the fire. Every neighbor that got targeted found themselves with banana bread on the porch, handwritten notes of support, and a link to our secure chat group. It wasn't just rebellion, it was community. And while Karen thought she was tightening the leash, what she didn't realize was this: the more she pulled, the more people woke up. In war, timing is everything, and in HOA wars, timing comes with a deadline, a spreadsheet, and a passive-aggressive flyer printed in Comic Sans. Thanks to Martin and Frankie, we'd confirmed that Karen had just under 5 weeks before the lake lease expired, and she wasn't wasting a second. Word had spread that she was preparing something called a special assessment, which is HOA speak for surprise bill that ruins your vacation plans. Every homeowner would be charged $85/month temporarily to enhance community assets, aka buy the lake, and turn it into a private retreat for her chosen ones. The worst part? Her board was eating it up. One guy even called it a visionary move for neighborhood prestige. I wanted to ask if he'd ever tried fishing for bass next to a champagne bar, but Karen's plan had one fatal flaw: money. As much as she liked pretending otherwise, her empire was stretched thinner than the vegan cheese she served at her eco-conscious HOA mixer. And raising nearly $300,000, 0 cents, in a few weeks, not easy, especially when half the neighborhood was one wrong weed away from mutiny. That's when I made a call to Pinecrest Ventures, the company that still owned the lake. I kept things polite and vague, just a local resident with some interest in preserving community assets. They directed me to a man named Tom Branson, VP of Property Holdings, whose voice sounded exactly like someone who'd been dealing with HOA people for too long. I asked if the lake was still for sale. He sighed and said, "Are you offering cash?" I said, "Yes." "Then we should talk." By the next morning, we were sitting in a corner booth at a diner just outside city limits. Tom looked exactly like a man about to sell his headache. He told me Karen had a deal on the table, but it was contingent on financing and HOA approval. "We've been burned before," he admitted. "You show me proof of funds and close in a week, it's yours." So I did. I offered $370,000, 0 cents, 15% above Karen's bid, and said I could close in 7 days, no contingencies. He blinked. "You serious?" I smiled, serious enough to not bring a lawyer to breakfast. That was the moment the war plan clicked. While Karen was scrambling for nickels and signatures, I was about to buy the ground from under her. But first, I needed to make sure the community knew what she was really planning. That's when I stumbled on the email, or more accurately, it stumbled into my inbox from a board member with a guilty conscience and a flair for screenshotting things they shouldn't. It was an internal message from Karen titled Community Vision Alignment. Harmless enough until I read the line: "We must ensure the lake becomes a private amenity exclusive to homeowners who reflect Brook Lake values. Recent demographic shifts have introduced unsuitable elements." My stomach turned. She wasn't just trying to privatize the lake, she was trying to segregate it. Worse, she'd already hired a firm to draft blueprints for a members-owned lakeside lounge, which conveniently eliminated all current fishing spots and public access points. A luxury experience for proper families, she called it. Proper, as in not me, not Nora, not half the community she'd been fining into silence. I printed the email and stared at it like it might catch fire from my glare. Karen didn't just want control. She wanted ownership, exclusivity, erasure. Well, not on my watch. I emailed Tom that night confirming our deal. We'd start paperwork in the morning. I didn't tell anyone outside the resistance group, not yet. We had 7 days to change the fate of the lake. And I had one more surprise for Karen, one she'd never see coming. One word: the deed. Saturday arrived like it had been summoned by a smug invitation printed on overpriced cardstock. Karen's party, the Brook Lake Estates Summer Legacy Celebration, was everything you'd expect from a woman who color codes her trash bins. There were string quartets, there were gourmet sliders, there were crystal pitchers of infused cucumber water guarded like national treasures. What there wasn't, a single new resident in sight. Invitations had gone out selectively, which in Karen speak meant if you've been fined in the last 6 months or speak more than one language, stay home. Nora and I weren't invited. Neither were Angela, Rick, or any member of what she'd recently started calling the disruption crowd. I wasn't offended. I had RSVP'd to a different agenda. As the party reached its smug crescendo, laughter echoing off the lake, wine glasses clinking like the soundtrack of Entitlement, I arrived. Not in beachwear or seersucker. No, I wore a crisp navy blazer, sunglasses, and the kind of calm smile that says, I know something you don't. Flanking me were two men. One, my real estate attorney holding a leather briefcase, and the other, a very bored-looking local police officer who had just enough HOA trauma in his eyes to be on my side. We walked past the charcuterie table, past the string quartet, past Karen herself, who was mid-tat and clearly enjoying the spotlight like a Bond villain at her peak. She saw me and blinked. Once, twice, then narrowed her eyes like she was trying to melt me with HOA laser vision. I stepped up to the mic she'd just been using. Good afternoon, Brook Lake Estates, I said cheerfully as partygoers turned with confusion. Hope you're enjoying the lake today. It's beautiful, isn't it? Karen was already marching toward me in her lemon-colored power blouse. This is a private event, she hissed. You are not welcome here, Mr. Granger. I nodded politely. Actually, Karen, that's exactly what I'm here to talk about. You see, this event, technically, is happening on private property, just not your private property. I held up a thick folder, freshly notarized and satisfyingly heavy. As of 48 hours ago, this lake and the surrounding 10 feet of shoreline now belong to me, not the HOA, not Pinecrest Ventures, me, Elliot Granger. The silence was a full second long, then fractured into gasps and wine-fueled whispers. Karen turned a shade of crimson, usually reserved for malfunctioning sun lamps. That's absurd, she barked. This is HOA-sanctioned land. We have access rights. My lawyer calmly flipped open the folder and held up a copy of the deed. The police officer nodded. Actually, ma'am, he's correct. And given the expiration of the prior lease agreement and violations documented by the previous tenant, you're technically trespassing. Karen looked like she might actually implode. This isn't how things are done, she growled. You're ruining a community tradition. I smiled. Karen, you built your empire on rules. Today, the rules turned on you. I gave her a polite nod, then turned to the crowd. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and vacate the premises. Unless, of course, you'd like to stay and chat with Officer Ruiz about trespassing protocol. Slowly, guests began to scatter, awkwardly collecting folding chairs, cheese plates, and dignity. A few cast Karen uncertain glances. One man muttered, maybe we should have invited the guy with the deed. Another just whispered, damn. If you've never watched a tyrant unravel in real time, I highly recommend it. It's like Shakespeare meets daytime television, only with more PDFs. Within 48 hours of the party that turned eviction notice, a video began circulating in our group chat. It was grainy, clearly recorded on a phone, but the audio was crystal clear. Karen, in full HOA regalia, offering Martin Kane, yes, our Martin, a deal. I can make all your violation notices disappear, she said sweetly. And if you help convince Elliot to sell the lake back to us, I'll make sure you have a seat on the new board. Paid, of course. Martin, bless his devious heart, had recorded the entire thing. Karen forgot the first rule of being a villain, he told me. Don't try to bribe a retired ethics attorney who owns a Ring camera and a personal grudge. The fallout was nuclear. Once the video hit the community Facebook group, tagged with phrases like Karengate and Watergate 2, HOA edition, residents started losing their collective minds. 3 HOA board members resigned within days, citing stress and family time, which was code for, I don't want to go down with the Karenship. One even left a note on my porch that said, I didn't know she was serious about the private lounge, Brad. You just thought she wanted to build a giant dock with a wine fridge for charity. Meanwhile, I quietly introduced a new policy for Rachel's Lake. All kids in the community could fish for free, except those whose parents were still serving on the HOA board. Suddenly, ethics reform had never moved faster. Within a week, all the remaining loyalists had either resigned or were pretending they'd never heard of Karen Wellington. But Karen wasn't done digging. No, she doubled down. That's how she ended up caught on my security camera at 11:37 p.m., wearing all black like a dollar store ninja, crouched near the lake edge with a small bottle. She looked both determined and wildly underdressed for crime. A few seconds later, she poured a strange liquid into the water and vanished. It took less than a day for the footage to go viral. The caption, HOA president attempts aquatic vengeance, fails spectacularly. The police weren't amused. She was charged with criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. When questioned, she claimed it was just essential oils for Lake Ora purification. The responding officer apparently laughed so hard he choked on his pen. The city's mayor, James Whitmore, who had previously been spotted at several of Karen's wine socials, suddenly developed amnesia. When asked if he would support HOA enforcement actions against me, he said, "I believe in community dialogue, which is political code for absolutely not, I'm backing away slowly." With her political lifeline gone, Karen's power base evaporated. The HOA board voted unanimously to initiate a full financial audit, digging into the last 5 years of spending. What they found wasn't just eyebrow raising, it was forehead slapping. Tens of thousands spent on consulting with firms registered to Karen's cousin, travel reimbursements for eco research, and a $12,000 eco cents invoice labeled community ambiance enhancement, which turned out to be a custom-built wine cooler. And just like that, the final thread started to snap. The woman who once fined children for sidewalk chalk was now facing lawsuits, criminal charges, and a complete collapse of her carefully curated kingdom. But trust me, she hadn't hit rock bottom yet. That part was coming next. The thing about winning a war, especially a petty HOA-style suburban war, is that you eventually have to decide what peace looks like. Did I want revenge? Sure. But more than that, I wanted resolution. So 2 weeks after Karen was charged, I invited every homeowner, except current and former HOA board members, to a town hall-style meeting in my backyard. A local taco truck catered. We had folding chairs, lemonade, and zero passive-aggressive signage. That night, I stood before the largest gathering our neighborhood had seen that didn't involve forced tree trimming compliance meetings and said 4 simple words: "The lake is yours." I explained that I was donating ownership of Rachel's Lake to a newly established community trust, but because I'm still me, I attached 3 conditions. First, complete restructuring of the HOA board. Term limits, transparent voting, no more lifetime thrones. Second, permanent elimination of discriminatory policies, no more selectively enforced rules, no more subjective aesthetic violations, no more weaponized bylaws. And third, creation of a rotating community ethics committee made up of randomly selected residents each year to oversee all a jury of your literal peers, if you will. The crowd didn't clap, they cheered. Patty from the bakery cried into a churro. Frankie Morales fist bumped me so hard I almost dropped the deed. Even Martin, usually so composed, got misty-eyed when I unveiled the final detail. The lake would officially be renamed Rachel's Lake in memory of my wife. Her name would live on, not in court filings, but in laughter, rippling water, and the squeals of kids learning to fish for the first time. But wait, I wasn't done. As the applause faded, I reached for one more folder. "There's something else," I said, grinning. "During this whole mess, I've been quietly acquiring the mortgage notes for 17 properties in this neighborhood." I let the room go quiet. "One of them belongs to Karen Wellington." Gasps, stunned silence. One guy actually whispered, "No way." I nodded. "I didn't do it to foreclose. I did it to prevent her from cutting and running. If she tries to sell and vanish, she'll have to deal with me, and if she stays, well, let's just say late fees are going to be enforced with extreme fairness." That was the real end game. Not humiliation, not punishment, accountability. Karen couldn't just disappear with a glass of Chardonnay and a trail of lawsuits behind her. She would face the people she hurt, or at the very least, be forced to walk past them on her way to pick up her Amazon packages. Within a month, the newly restructured HOA was voted in. Safira Duskland, a longtime resident and former flower shop owner Karen once tried to evict over inappropriate begonias, became our new president. Under her leadership, a full audit revealed tens of thousands in misused funds, which were refunded into a new community improvement fund. Karen, she quietly sold her house at a loss and moved out of state. No goodbye party, no farewell speech, just one lonely for sale sign slowly drooping in the summer heat. Her empire built on fear and fine print, was gone. All that remained was a single brass mailbox plaque and a neighborhood that had learned how to fight back. Together, the first annual Rachel's Lake Family Fishing Day brought out more than 70 residents. Kids laughed, dogs barked, people who hadn't spoken in years grilled hot dogs side by side. Nora, she helped organize the event, wore a bucket hat, taught a younger kid how to cast a line, and when the sun set and the lake shimmered gold, she looked at me and smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Rachel's funeral. "Mom would have loved this," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. Yeah, she would have. And she'd love what you've become too. So here's the moral of the story. If you're dealing with your own HO, Karen, don't fight tyranny with shouting. Fight it with strategy, with empathy, and with a damned it. Here's the real takeaway, folks. Power doesn't always show up in uniforms or fancy titles. Sometimes it wears yoga pants, clutches a clipboard, and hides behind community standards. But guess what? You don't need to yell to push back. You need brains, receipts, and maybe a lawyer with a little free time. This wasn't just about a lake. It was about refusing to be bullied by a system designed to make you feel small. So next time someone tells you those are just the rules, ask who wrote them and who benefited. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. If you've ever had your own HOA horror story, or you're just here for the drama, drop a comment, smash that like button, and subscribe for more stories where justice shows up in unexpected ways. And remember, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight it with documents and a wicked sense of humor.